I never imagined that the people I trusted the most would turn their backs on me. It all started when my brother, whom I had always looked up to, began persuading our parents that I wasn't fit to stay in the family business. I had dedicated years of my life to building it alongside them, pouring my heart and soul into every project. But apparently, that wasn't enough. My brother convinced our parents that my contributions were minimal, that I was just an accessory to the business's success. I could see the shift in their behavior, the way they began to question my decisions and undermine my efforts. It was subtle at first, missed meetings, decisions made without my input. But soon, it became clear. They were pushing me out. The day I was officially cut from the family business felt like a betrayal I couldn't process. It hurt deeply, not just because of the business, but because it was my family, the people who were supposed to believe in me, who had dismissed me so easily. I couldn't understand how my brother, someone I had always trusted, could do this to me. It was as if all the love, all the support we had shown each other had vanished. But in the midst of all that pain, something unexpected happened. I received a letter from my late grandfather's lawyer. My grandfather had always believed in me. He left me something in his will, an unexpected gift. It wasn't just money or assets, it was a piece of land he had loved, a place where he and I had spent countless hours together. It was like a reminder that someone in my family had seen my worth all along. I realized that no matter what my brother or parents thought, I had value. I had been seen and loved by someone who mattered. Growing up in a family where business was everything shaped my entire life. My grandfather was the one who started it all. He began with a small workshop, building it from the ground up with his own 2 hands. I remember stories my parents would tell me about how he'd work late into the night, covered in sweat and dirt, doing everything himself in the beginning. That workshop eventually grew into a mid-sized company, and it became the foundation of our family's legacy. From as far back as I can remember, the business was always part of my life. Family dinners weren't just about catching up or talking about our days. They were often filled with discussions about deals, strategies, and future plans for the company. It wasn't something we could escape. It was the air we breathed. My brother Nick and I were both expected to follow in those footsteps. My parents raised us to be part of the business, to one day take over and continue the legacy that our grandfather had started. For me, it felt natural. I loved the idea of contributing to something that meant so much to my family. I wanted to prove myself, to show that I had what it took to help the business thrive. I worked hard, learning everything I could from my parents, spending time in every department, understanding the ins and outs of the company. Nick, on the other hand, wasn't interested. While I was poring over spreadsheets or shadowing our parents in meetings, he was more focused on living his life outside of the business. It wasn't that he wasn't capable. Nick was smart, probably smarter than I was in some ways. But he didn't have the same drive or passion for the family business. He didn't seem to care about it the way I did. For years, I thought that eventually Nick would come around, that he'd want to be involved once he saw how much potential the business had. But that day never really came. Even though I was the one putting in all the effort, it always felt like Nick got a pass. While I worked late nights, attending meetings and putting in the hours, Nick was off doing his own thing. But despite all that, I never imagined that the very person who seemed so indifferent to the business would one day play a role in pushing me out of it. I'll never forget the day it all came crashing down. We had a family meeting, one of those big official ones where everything important gets discussed. I walked in thinking it was going to be another conversation about the future of the company, maybe some new ideas or strategies. But I wasn't prepared for what was actually coming. In that meeting, my parents dropped the bombshell. They had decided that Nick would be taking over the company. My brother, who had barely lifted a finger to help, was suddenly the chosen one to lead. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All the years I had dedicated to the business, the late nights, the endless hours of work, I thought my contributions mattered, but in that moment, it became clear they didn't. What hurt the most wasn't just that Nick was given the role. It was how easily my efforts were disregarded. It was as if everything I had done for the family business meant nothing. They expected me to take on a subordinate role to continue working hard while my brother, who never cared about the business, would be the one calling the shots. I sat there numb as they outlined their plan. My heart was breaking. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about my family, my parents and brother, showing me that they didn't see me as an equal. I realized in that moment that no matter how much I gave, I would never be treated fairly. So, I made the hardest decision I've ever made. I quit. I walked away from the business I had poured my soul into, knowing I deserved better. It was painful, but I couldn't stay where I wasn't valued. After my grandfather passed, the family gathered for the reading of his will. It was a somber moment, filled with memories and emotions. I wasn't expecting much, honestly. After everything that had happened with the family business, I figured I'd be left with whatever they thought was fair, which in their eyes didn't seem to be much. As the lawyer read through the will, I sat quietly listening to the usual details. But then, something unexpected happened. My grandfather had left me something incredibly valuable: full ownership of his original workshop and all of his patents. These were the very patents that had been the foundation of the family business. I was stunned. I glanced over at Nick, who had been sitting there with that smug look as if he already knew what was coming. But as soon as the lawyer finished reading that part of the will, Nick's face completely changed. It hit him. Without the patents, the company was nothing. They couldn't move forward without my approval or involvement. Suddenly, the power dynamic had shifted. All of Nick's posturing, all of his plans to take over crumbled right in front of me. He realized that he couldn't run the company without the rights to those patents, and now I was the one who held them. It felt surreal. My grandfather, even after his passing, had found a way to make sure I was recognized for my contributions, for everything I had worked for. In that moment, I felt seen. I wasn't just someone who could be pushed aside anymore. I had the key to the future of the business, and Nick knew it. After the will reading, I decided to meet with a patent attorney to really understand what my grandfather had left me. I needed to know the true value of the patents and what this all meant. Sitting in the attorney's office, I remember feeling a mix of emotions, nervous but curious. I wasn't exactly sure what I was holding on to, but I had a feeling it was bigger than I initially thought. The attorney took his time explaining each patent and how they played a critical role in the production of the company's key products. What struck me the most was that the entire operation heavily depended on these patents, and to my surprise, the licensing agreement that allowed the company to use them was about to expire. Without my consent, they couldn't renew it. In other words, I now had complete control over the very thing that kept the company running. This was a huge revelation. It was the first time I truly realized the leverage I had. It wasn't just about having a piece of the family legacy. It was about having the most important piece. I was holding the power to decide the future of the business that my brother, Nick, thought he was in charge of. A few days later, my father and Nick called me to discuss a solution. They tried to frame it as a way for us all to move forward peacefully. They wanted to buy me out, offering what they thought was a generous amount of money. But as I sat there listening to them, I knew exactly what was happening. They didn't expect me to realize how valuable the patents were. They thought I'd take the offer, get out of their way, and let them run things as they always had. I refused, calmly but firmly. I told them I wasn't interested in selling. They were shocked, clearly not expecting me to stand my ground. That was the moment I signaled that things were going to be different from now on. I wasn't just going to step aside and let them take control. I had a plan, and it was time to assert myself in ways they never imagined. This was just the beginning. As time went on, I watched the family business slowly start to unravel. At first, I wasn't sure how things would play out. I had refused to sell the patents, but part of me wondered if they would find a way around it. Maybe they'd come up with new processes, or maybe they'd secure a deal with another supplier. But deep down, I knew the truth. The company was too reliant on what I now controlled. Weeks turned into months, and I could see the cracks beginning to show. Without access to the patented processes, they were struggling to fulfill their contracts. Production slowed, and soon the delays began piling up. Customers weren't happy, and contracts that had been in place for years were suddenly at risk. It was like watching a ship slowly sink, knowing there was nothing they could do to stop it. I heard through the grapevine that Nick and my father were scrambling to keep things afloat. They tried to negotiate with other companies, but no one could replicate the exact processes my grandfather had patented. The more they tried, the more desperate they became. Soon, the layoffs began. It was heartbreaking to hear about people I had worked with for years losing their jobs. The company had once been a thriving business, a place where I had poured my heart and soul into for so long. Now it was spiraling into decline, all because they couldn't secure the one thing that kept the engine running. Every day, I received updates about another contract that had fallen through, another client who had walked away. The company, which once had been the pride of our family, was now teetering on the edge of collapse. It was strange to watch it all happen. On one hand, I felt a sense of vindication, knowing that they had underestimated me and my contributions for so long. On the other hand, there was sadness in seeing something my grandfather had worked so hard to build crumble like this. But I knew this was the path they had chosen the moment they decided to dismiss my role in the company. As things continued to fall apart, I realized I had made the right decision. I wasn't just going to stand by and let them take what I had earned. They had underestimated me, but now they were seeing the consequences of their actions firsthand. After everything fell apart, I knew it was time to step into my own future. The workshop my grandfather left me had been sitting empty for too long, but it held so much potential. I decided to reopen it, breathe life back into the place where it all began. This time, though, it wasn't just about continuing his legacy, it was about building my own. Starting my own company was both exciting and nerve-wracking. I knew I had the patents, which gave me a significant advantage, but there was still so much to figure out. I got to work setting up the workshop, hiring a small team, and getting the ball rolling. It felt empowering to finally be in control of my destiny, doing things on my own terms without having to fight for recognition. Word got around quickly. Former employees, the ones who had been laid off from my father and brother's company, started reaching out to me. These were people who had worked alongside me for years, people who believed in what we were building. They knew how much I cared about the business, and they trusted that I could turn things around. Before I knew it, they were lining up to work with me, eager to be part of something new and exciting. Clients, too, started coming back. Many of them had been unhappy with the direction my father and brother had taken the company, especially with all the production delays and the uncertainty that had surrounded the business. They wanted stability, and they knew I could provide that. It didn't take long before contracts were being signed and the orders started pouring in. Meanwhile, my father and brother's company was barely hanging on. Without the patented processes, they couldn't keep up with demand, and their remaining employees were jumping ship. Watching them struggle to stay afloat was surreal. It was like a complete reversal of roles. I had gone from being pushed aside to now running a company that was thriving, while their business was on life support. Starting my own company had been the best decision I ever made. I was finally in a place where I could make the decisions, run things the way I believed they should be run, and honor my grandfather's legacy in a way that felt true to me. It wasn't just about proving myself anymore. It was about creating something that would last, something that was truly mine. As the weeks passed, it became clear that my father and brother's business was sinking fast. They had tried everything, cutting costs, pushing out lower quality products, and even reaching out to old clients. But nothing could save them from the inevitable. Without the patents, They simply couldn't compete. Then one day, Nick came to me, desperate. I hadn't seen him like that before. The cocky, smug attitude was completely gone. He practically begged me to help save the family business. He talked about our history, our upbringing, and how our grandfather would have wanted us to stick together. He painted this picture of us as a family united, and I could see how scared he was. But at that moment, I realized that no matter how much he tried to appeal to my emotions, nothing had really changed. He only wanted my help because he had no other option. It was hard, I won't lie. Part of me still wanted to salvage something, to make peace with my family. But I remembered all the times my efforts were dismissed, how I was overlooked, how I was treated like I didn't matter. Now that the tables had turned, I had to stand my ground. I had worked too hard to let go of everything I had built just to save them from the consequences of their own decisions. So, I told Nick no. I explained that I couldn't help them, not after everything that had happened. He tried again, insisting that we could rebuild together, but I stood firm. It wasn't about revenge, it was about protecting my future, my company, and the legacy that my grandfather had entrusted to me. It wasn't long after that the family business officially collapsed. Contracts fell through, employees left, and there was no way to recover. It was strange watching it all unfold, knowing that the company I had once been so dedicated to was now gone. But as I watched my own business grow stronger, with new clients and opportunities coming my way, I knew I had made the right decision. This journey had been difficult, but in the end, I was in control of my destiny. I had built something that was mine, and that was more important than anything else. A year had passed since my family's business had crumbled, and I had poured my heart into building my own company. Everything was going well, better than I could have imagined. Former employees, clients, and even new partners had flocked to me. My company was thriving, and I was finally starting to feel the stability and success I had dreamed of. But just when I thought things had settled, Nick reappeared with a desperation move that caught me off guard. I started hearing rumors through the grapevine that Nick was trying to start a new company. At first, I brushed it off. After the collapse of the family business, I figured he'd move on to something else, maybe start fresh in a different industry or even leave business altogether. But the more I heard, the more concerned I became. The whispers got louder, and soon enough, it was clear. Nick's new venture was far too familiar. He was working on a product that was suspiciously similar to the ones based on the very patents I owned, the patents my grandfather had entrusted to me. At first, I was angry. After everything that had happened, after all the decisions and choices he had made, Nick was trying to take shortcuts again. This time, he was playing with fire, and I knew it wouldn't end well. I decided to dig a little deeper and confirm what I had heard. Sure enough, the product he was developing was nearly identical to the ones that relied on my patents. It was like history repeating itself, except this time, I wasn't going to let him take advantage of me or my work. I had worked too hard to get to this point, and I wasn't about to sit by and let Nick undermine everything I had built. It was clear that the conflict between us wasn't over yet. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, to tell him that I knew what he was doing and to stop this nonsense before it got out of hand. But I had learned over the past year that rushing into things wasn't the best approach. I needed to be strategic, just like when I had asserted control over the patents. I had to protect my company, my assets, and my future carefully. And if Nick thought he could pull a fast one on me, he was in for a rude awakening. In the back of my mind, I couldn't help but feel a sense of disappointment. Despite everything, despite the chance to move on, Nick hadn't learned. He was still the same, trying to take the easy way out, cutting corners and trying to capitalize on something he didn't create. It was sad, really. I had always hoped he would change, that he'd see the bigger picture, but here we were again. Now I had to make sure he didn't succeed in this latest attempt to undercut me. My next move would be crucial. I had to decide how to handle this, whether through legal means, confrontation, or another approach. One thing was certain, I wasn't going to back down. This wasn't just business anymore. It was about standing up for myself, my hard work, and the legacy my grandfather had left me. The conflict wasn't over, but this time, I was ready.